Okay, welcome everybody. I want to thank everybody for coming out tonight. I think this is, Baruch Hashem, the third time we've been zocheh to have Rabbi Tatz visit us over here, and we appreciate it so much, so much. I want to thank, first of all, the sponsors of the shir tonight, the Smuckler, Fuchs, and Bezaglo families, sponsoring the shir tonight. Liulu Nishmas, Henuch ben Yaakov Akoyen, Dr. Henry Smuckler. Thank you so much to the families, all very special families to our shul, very special to the community, and we want to thank you so much for sponsoring tonight. I'm not going to say too much right now. I just anybody who has had the pleasure, the merit to hear the shirim of Rabbi Tatz, I don't need to say anything. We all know that this is something very, very special, and something that for many of us who have been always hungering to grow, have been mevakshim, looking for something deeper, Rabbi Tatz has been there for many, many years as one of the main sources of this type of deep Torah and deep understanding. And for many of us, it's been a crucial aspect of our growth and development over the years. And I feel so blessed that we have Rabbi Tatz here today, and I know we all feel the same way. So I'm going to stop talking, and we're zocheh to hear Divrei Torah from Rabbi Tatz.
First of all, thank you very much to the Rabbi for this opportunity to learn a bit together, and thank you to any sponsors who made this possible. I thought maybe we could also dedicate this to Rabbi Kidabinsky, maybe a good idea. Miss him, so we could add that maybe. I would like to change the advertised topic a little bit. Can I do that? Yeah? No? I'd like to speak about something that I haven't really spoken about before, certainly not here, so I hope you'll find it enlightening and give a new perspective on something very important. You know, it always pays to deal with fundamentals, right? Once you have the foundations in place, everything follows from that. So, as the Rambam says, he always preferred to speak about things that are basics and fundamental, and from there you can build. So, here's something that is fundamental to everything, and I must say I've only recently become fully aware of it, because since Rav Moshe Shapiro left us, I've been listening to a lot of recordings, and I realize now that over many years, maybe 20 years, he returned to the same subject every year, but from a different perspective. And see now that he's building a whole picture, and it is really a very basic aspect of Jewish foundation. So let's talk about that and see where it takes us. If I asked you, what is the basis of Torah? What's the basis of Judaism, the Jewish experience? What would you point out as being the most fundamental element? What would you say? Emunah. I'm going to leave it to the ladies, are you? What would you say? Well, let's ask about history. Going through Jewish history, what would you say is the focal point that everything depends on? Giving the Torah, right? And that's not the case. Judaism is built on the Exodus from Egypt. Yetzias Mitzrayim. And it's not obvious why it should be that way. The Exodus from Egypt is the beginning of a journey that leads to Sinai. Surely you name journeys for destination, not for point of departure. Do you have a seat? When I came to Toronto, I got on a plane that was the Toronto plane. I had to know where to get it in London, otherwise I wouldn't make the flight. But that's not how you name a journey. We left Egypt to travel to Sinai, and that was the climax of the journey. It doesn't get better than that. Kissed by the kisses of his mouth, was an intimate moment of marriage. Surely that's where we should place the emphasis. No? Yes? No? So I think it's not so simple. So let's do this like this. First, let's establish that Torah is built, and the whole Jewish experience and our Jewish identity and our Jewish education is based on the Exodus from Egypt, Yetzias Mitzrayim. and then understand that that's not so simple, and try to think through why it might be like that. I guarantee you it doesn't get more basic than this. First of all aspects of Judaism are based on the Exodus. For example, mitzvahs. Half the mitzvahs in the Torah actually says, I want you to do this because I took you out of Egypt. Probably half the mitzvahs, hundreds of mitzvahs, and not only that, Shabbat, which is equivalent to all the mitzvahs, says the Ramban, classically and clearly states, because I took you out of Egypt. You should keep the Shabbat because Hashem took us out of Egypt. Which means really all the mitzvahs are based on the Exodus. Now, if there's one thing that mitzvahs should be based on, it's on the giving of the Torah. That's when the mitzvahs were given. Again, what does leaving Egypt have to do with mitzvahs? The mitzvahs weren't given then. They were given 7 weeks later when we arrived at Sinai. Hashem gave us the Torah with the mitzvahs. But when we celebrate mitzvahs, we keep mitzvahs. Why are we doing it? Because we left Egypt. False weights and measures, honesty in business, ribbis, not taking interest, not eating insects, you name it. The Torah says, because I took you out of Egypt. That's not obvious. Do we share the problem? Do we feel the problem? You know, as Jews, we are so used to saying Zechel Yetzias Mitzrayim that we don't think about it. But it's not obvious that it should be that way. Secondly, incidentally, we talk about Shabbos, right? Shabbat. What's really weird is, Shabbat is clearly a celebration of the creation. The agenda of creation was set when the world was created, and the end point was reaching Shabbat. And indeed, when we make Kiddush on Shabbos, we say Zechel L'Maaseh Bereshis. We are celebrating this Shabbos because it is a commemoration of the creation. Clear. And in the same breath, we say Zechel Yetzias Mitzrayim. We're celebrating Shabbos because we left Egypt. What has leaving Egypt got to do with Shabbos? And how do you put in the same breath a mention of the creation and the mention of Shabbos? So what are they going to do with each other? I mean, in terms of leaving Egypt. Obviously, the suggestion is that leaving Egypt is somehow a new creation. But it's not clear how that works. Next point. When Hashem introduces himself, I'm God, this is me. How does he introduce himself? Anech Hashem Elokecha, I am your God who took you out of Egypt. Not who created you, not who created the world, not who is the reality, took you out of Egypt. I mean, it's a big deal that he took us out of Egypt. But surely I married you at Sinai? When you think about your marriage, right? I know some of you try not to think about it. But when you think about your marriage, right? When you think about your marriage, do you remember your love as the day you met? Or the day of the explosive moment of marriage? I suppose you do remember that. But there was the beginning of a journey. So when Hashem introduces himself to us, he wants you to think of him as the God who took you out of Egypt. Not who created the world, not who met you at Sinai and married you then, the God who took you out of Egypt. There's another way to see this, and that is that the Smak, one of the great, going back 700 years, he asks a question which is, the Gemara says that when you die, Hashem asks you 5 or 6 questions. Were you honest in business? Did you try to have a family? A number of fundamental questions. One of them is Tzipisa Lishua. Did you long for the redemption? And the reason for that is because you only get in terms of your longing. You can only appreciate in terms of how much the longing was. The Gemara says you long to marry because you're longing for the part of yourself you lost. And so we say Hashem, Yichastecha Hashem Aleinu. Hashem, give us your kindness, kasher yuchal nulach, as we longed for you. You can only expect the kindness according to your craving. Right? The food is only tasty when you're hungry. You've got to have that craving. And so we are longing for the redemption. That's called Tzipiyah Lishua. The problem is, where does God command you to long for the redemption? He's not fair to him, ask me a question when I die, but it's not fair to ask me if I lived up to an obligation that he never gave me. Look in the text of the Torah, you won't find anywhere you're obliged to long for the redemption. You hear the question. Which means that when you die, and Hashem's going to ask you, were you honest in business? The Torah many times talks about that. Did you try to have a family? There's a mitzvah to have a family. But there's no mitzvah anywhere in the Torah that's obvious that to long for redemption. So how can he hold me accountable for something he never asked me to do? That's his question. Listen to his answer. Not only does the Torah tell you to do it, it couldn't be more fundamental. Why? Because when Hashem wants you to fulfill the most important mitzvah of all, which is emunah, which means believing in Him and relating to Him, how does He phrase it? I want you to believe in me and relate to me, Anochi Hashem Elokecha, as a God who redeems. That's his identity, which means right in the center of the mitzvah of emunah is not just believing that there's a God who exists and is reality, but a God who redeems, which means that as you, in fulfilling the mitzvah of emunah, it has to be a fulfillment of the mitzvah of longing for a redemption, because that's how he identifies himself. So again, you see that the fundamental is, right, the nature, so to speak, the signature, the motto, the mission statement, whatever you like, that Hashem presents himself with is taking out Egypt. There's another way to see this, and that is, there are probably many ways, but here's another one. The most potent educational experience of all time is, what's the most amazing, intense educational experience of all probably of all nations? Is what? Educational experience. Educational experience. Where do we do an educational process that is just the Pesach Seder, right? The Pesach Seder, right? It doesn't get more amazing than that. Show and tell, frogs jumping all over the place. I mean, people go crazy. A child should get up from the Pesach Seder so intensely fired up with his Judaism that it lasts the rest of his life, right? Chazal say that when Gideon met an angel, as the Malach appeared to him one morning, he said to the angel, "Where are your signs and wonders? Where are your miracles?" That's a strange question to ask an angel. Chazal said it was the first day of Pesach. And the night before, he sat at his father's Seder table, and he was so living in a world of miracles that the first thing he could say to an angel when he appeared was, "Where are your miracles?" The child should walk away from the Seder with an indelible experience of what it means to be a Jew. He should walk away from the Seder with this picture of having left Egypt for that journey, that cosmic journey through the genocidal deserts of history, clutching that Sefer Torah to a cosmic destination. And that happens at the Pesach Seder. So how come we don't do that for receiving of the Torah? You know, we could have this little kind of mountain thing. We could do some artificial electricity, like lightning. We could do a lot of drama for receiving the Torah, right? And we don't do anything. A cheesecake. I know a cheesecake's very important. I know it's a very important educational message. But it's not a Pesach Seder. So when it comes to educating, which is firing up children, igniting them for their whole process through life, that's called a Pesach Seder. We don't do it for anything else. Hanukkah, we light candles. Purim, we are pretty dramatic. But I mean, the preeminent educational experience, probably unrivaled in all human culture, is a Pesach Seder. And there's a requirement to experience as if it happened to you. It's all there. About what? Exodus. But 7 weeks later, when we receive the Torah, which is much greater, where we actually made a face-to-face meeting with the creator of the universe, we don't get that dramatic. So what I'm saying is that it's clear that the exodus from Egypt is amazingly fundamental, and our whole consciousness as Jews is based on that. And I would suggest to you it's not so obvious why that should be. Obviously the exodus culminates in the receiving of the Torah. Obviously it's one process. But the emphasis seems to be on the beginning. You know, we count the Omer. We count 7 weeks of the Omer. And what are we counting? The Omer. Omer was the sacrifice that was brought at Pesach. We're not celebrating, we're not counting towards something that we do. We're counting back with an eye backwards on where we left. This needs explanation. So let me suggest to you what I think is a way through this. Let me tell you what I think is a way through this. What I'm going to share with you is not so simple, and maybe there's a lot of work to be done beyond what I'll say. But I think this is the direction. This needs effort, not so simple. But let's reach for it and see where we get. Leaving Egypt was a beginning of a creation, a recreation of the world in a higher mode, which is beyond description. Do you have a Rambam's Manim somewhere? Do you have a Rambam here? Thank you, you do. Thank you, do. Thank you very much. Thank you, if you do. Thank you very much, and I'm sure we have a sitting, right? So, when we left Egypt, 3 things happened that were new. A whole new paradigm opened, comprising 3 elements which actually are one. Let's go through the 3 and see what they mean. The first was we met a new name, the name of Hashem. God revealed a name that was unknown before. How do we know this? When Moshe Rabbeinu, is traveling with his sheep, and he comes to the foot of Sinai, and he sees a bush burning. You know, it was Sinai that he stood at, right? That he'd bring the Jews to later, the same place. And he sees a bush burning and not being consumed. By the way, it's very important to know, the bush was burning and not being consumed. That means burning and not burning. Burning means being consumed. That's what it means for a thing to burn. You know, the kids come home from Cheder with their little models of this little bush, with kind of the flames around it. It wasn't flames around it. It was burning and not burning. Burning means transforming the material into the energy. And the bush was burning and not burning. It was not like any miracle that occurred before. Miracles that occurred before, when Avram was thrown into a fire and didn't burn, he wasn't burning and not burning. He was just not burning, which is pretty impressive, but it's not paradoxical. There are things that don't burn in fires. This bush was burning and not burning. So he approaches this amazing sight, and Hashem says, take off your shoes, you're now meeting me. Shmi Hashem Yudke Vavke, I never made known to your forefathers. That means Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, the originators of the Jewish story, they never knew this name. They knew me through Kel Shakai, other names. They knew of this name, but they never met it. You're now for the first time making contact with me as I am. Yudke Vavke means, and Hashem expressed it as Eke, which means I am what I am. That means he's now making face-to-face contact with Hashem himself. Not through indirect. And it says it quite openly. This name they never knew. So what happened here, and that of course is a premonition of Sinai. What will happen? The Jews will leave Egypt, and they will arrive back at this point, and they will stand at the foot of a mountain that burns and is not burning. And by the way, they will become a people who burn through history without being consumed. It's a very resonant image that he sees at that time. And that's who we are, in case you hadn't noticed. Right? Burning but still here. So he stands at that place, and for the first time he meets the name of Hashem. And here's the key. That name of Hashem is the name of paradox. All other names are God operating in the world. They're paradoxical. There's a God. He creates things. There's energy behind all that you see in the world. But Yudke Vavke is paradoxical impossibility. That name means that all is one. That many things are one thing. The name of Hashem, we say Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. It doesn't mean there's one God and not two or three or four. It means there's nothing else. That means when you say that Shema and you say Hashem's name, you should disappear. Because Echad means only Him. That means you're not here. It has 4 letters, but it's one. It's all things in the world, but it's one. You're talking about impossible. And that name is the name that denotes Yediyah and Bechira, which means that you have free will and God knows in advance, which is impossible. It's the name of creation itself, which means the name that, as the Chazal say, Hashem began creating the world with din. Din means absolute justice and exacting rules. Saw that such a world could not survive. So you mixed together with it Rachamim, mercy. You can't mix Rachamim with Din. Din means no leeway. Rachamim means wiggle room. You can't be approximately exact. But that's what he did. It doesn't say he removed the Din and replaced it with Rachamim. He put Rachamim into the Din. You can't do that, but he did. So the world is created with Din, 100% accuracy and no leeway, and Rachamim as well. That name can do that. So it's the name of paradox, of opposite impossibilities. And that was never known before. So at that moment, a name reveals itself, which is a name of absolute and total unity that subsumes all else. You know, there's a Rambam that people misunderstand. Rambam says like this: the reason that we stood at Sinai, Rambam says, anybody who believes by means of miracles has some imperfection in his belief. His language is yesh beliboy amamin al pi oisos. Anybody who believes because of miracles, yesh beliboy doifi. Doifi means some imperfection, some taint. Says the Rambam, why? Because miracles could theoretically be done by magic and sorcery and other techniques. Which means that when you see miracles and you believe in God, there's some imperfection. And that's why we went to Sinai. Because Sinai was not miracles, it was God. We got kissed by the kisses of his mouth, as it says. Intimate meeting. We became one with him. And then there's no doubt. So people understand the Rambam like this. In Egypt, where we saw miracles, there was 98% proof. Because maybe this is sorcery. Maybe it's magic. So Hashem took us to Sinai. Jews are very skeptical. Jews. skeptical, hard to convince. So he took us to Sinai and met us personally. So for once in history, once and for all, there'd be no denying. Again, in Egypt, the miracles were 95%, 98%. We went to Sinai for 100%. That's wrong. And the reason it's wrong is because in Egypt, the Jews got the message 100%. The Egyptians got the message and they were not trying. The miracles in Egypt were definitely good enough. The Torah says 5 times, the reason I'm going to do miracles and plagues in Egypt that are miraculous is in order that Pharaoh and his people should know who I am. And they got the message and they were not trying. So here's the problem. If the miracles in Egypt are good enough, then why do we have to go to Sinai? If everyone got the message loud and clear in Egypt, then why do we have to stand at Sinai? And if you need to stand at Sinai, then it's not fair that he didn't put the Egyptians at Sinai. Again, one way or the other. Either the miracles in Egypt were good enough, then why do we have to go to Sinai to get a better proof? There was good enough in Egypt. And if it's not good enough, but you need to take us to Sinai, Hashem says he wants the Egyptians to get the message. Not fair not to give. What's going on? Listen to the answer. The miracles in Egypt were 100% good enough. Absolutely. We got the message. Everybody did. But there's some imperfection in your heart because that sort of proof could be done through sorcery. In other words, you conclude that God exists because you see a miracle. That doesn't mean you know him. That's a logical conclusion. If the water can turn to blood, then there's got to be somebody doing this. So you know that Hashem exists, but you haven't met him. It's a logical conclusion. 100% conclusion. We did not go to Sinai to get a better evidence. We went to Sinai to get married. And that's not for Egyptians. The reason we went to Sinai was not 95% proof, now it's 100. There was 100% proof in it, but it was only a proof. It wasn't an experience. Listen to Rabbi Moshe Shapiro. He doesn't get better than this. He says people think that we went to Sinai for a better hochacha. That means a better proof. He said, "Ze lo inyan shel otzmata hochacha." We didn't go to Egypt for a better proof. Ze inyan shel eichut hayediah. We went there for a different kind of knowledge. And that's not for Egyptians. So you see that the whole process is coming to know Hashem personally. Okay, so message number 1. The first element that changed, that was born, so to speak, was a face-to-face contact with the Yud-Kei Vav-Kei means, Hashem's name means reality, means existence. By the way, it's important to teach your children. When you start teaching your children about what we call God, you have to tell them it doesn't mean an old man in the sky with a white beard. It means existence. Right? Yud-Kei Vav-Kei means was, is, and will be. The name of Hashem's mean that which is. That's why the Rambam says that could never disappear. An object could disappear, but existence can't disappear. Okay, number 2. The second element that was born was a new type of prophecy. Of course, a prophet who could grasp Yud-Kei Vav-Kei. And that was Moshe Rabbeinu, that was Moses. Until then, prophets were of a different kind. And from then on, prophets were of a different kind. What was a prophet? Somebody that heard Hashem speak and delivered a message. In his own style. In his own personality. No 2 prophets ever speak the same. That's a principle. First of all, 2 Jews agreeing, definitely not normal. But note, if any 2 prophets come along and say the same message, one is lying. At least one is lying. That's a principle. Why? Because each prophet is an exquisite musical instrument, played by the master musician, playing the music of the master composer, but each instrument resonating with its own unique tone. And each prophet, through his consciousness and his personality, is delivering the message in the tone of his own character. But not Torah, not Chumash, not Moshe. Moshe opens his mouth and Hashem himself speaks. There's a whole new order of prophecy. And the reason it's critical, by the way, so when you learn Torah, when you learn Chumash, you're not hearing a prophet speak. Otherwise, people would say, well, that's his take. That's his spin. That's his nuance. That's true in every prophet. Yecheskel, Yirmiyah, and Yeshai. Not Chumash. When you read Torah, you're hearing our words, except for Dvarim. Sefer Dvarim is Moshe speaking. And that's why the style is so utterly different. The first 4 books of Torah is Hashem speaking, and a 6-year-old can read them with no problem. But you get to the Sefer Dvarim, then a 6-year-old cannot read Sefer Veni, Yevon, and no. These are terms that sound very much like Yeshaya. That's because Moshe is speaking the 5th book. It's a transitional book. It's the book of the receiver, and Hashem ratifies it. But Chumash, the first 4 books, Moshe opens his mouth and Hashem speaks. And therefore, you need to know when you study Yeshaya or Vadia or any other prophet, you're hearing a person speak, delivering Hashem's message and Hashem's words, but through the nuance of his character. But when you learn Chumash, You're hearing Hashem himself. And that takes a whole new category of prophecy. And Moshe Rabbeinu was the one. You know, the Malbim says something amazing. When Moshe stood at the burning bush, Hashem said to him, Shal na'alecha me'al raglecha. Take your shoes off your feet. His student Joshua, when he met Hashem, Hashem said, Shal na'alcha me'al raglecha. Take your shoe off your foot. Moshe has both shoes off. He's totally in the higher world. Yoshua's got one foot in and one. He's a transitional generation. He's got 1 foot in and 1 foot out. But Moshe is completely out of this world. And therefore, it's an utterly new form of prophecy. A prophet that can make contact, not with other names of Hashem operating in the world, but the name of Hashem in essence. Here's a dramatic way to say it. You know that we have 13 articles of faith, right? Everyone familiar with that? Some people say it every day after Shabbos. So we got 13 articles of faith, and here in the Siddur they are rephrased in a very short form, but they follow the Rambam's formulation. I believe with a perfect faith that Hashem exists, that He creates and conducts history, that He's one and there's no oneness like His, that He has no body, etc., etc. Right? These are the 13 fundamentals. What's astounding about them is, and these are fundamentals of Emunah, what we can say about Hashem, His connection to the world, what we call Torah, our connection to Him, what we call Tefillah. That's the development. All the way to the Mashiach and Tchias HaMesim. These are the 13 fundamentals. Listen to number 6. The first 4 are what we can say about Hashem. The 5th is connection with Him. That means not praying to anybody or anything else other than Him personally and directly. The 6th one, not us speaking to Him, but He's speaking to us. That's called Torah. And here's how it goes. Number 6. I believe with perfect, Shekol divrei neviim emes, that all the words of the prophets are true. All the words of the prophets are true. Does that include Moshe? Of course. Number 7. I believe with Shekol shenevuos Moshe Rabbeinu, that the prophecy of Moshe was true. And he was the father figure of all the other prophets. Watch what's happening here. In number 6, you declare that you believe that all the words of the prophets are true. All the prophets, including Moshe. Then there's a separate principle that Moshe's prophecy was true. It's worth a whole new one of the 13 articles. It's utterly different than believing in other prophets. You see that. To make this more astounding, here's an amazing question. Where do these 13 things come from? The Rambam doesn't move without a source. Not a word is without a source. Here we're talking about not an idea, but the 13 most basic ideas in Torah. Where did he get them? The Torah does not list 13 articles of faith. There's no Mishnah that lists 13 articles of faith. There's no Gemara that does it. Where did he get these from?
The Rabbanim?
What?
The Rabbanim?
Well, where did they get them from? Where did they find them? They don't make things up. It's a very basic question, right? Okay. The most common... Yeah, somebody?
It follows
Where-
a song like Yigdal, right?
What? Yigdal is a record of these.
Oh, all right.
Absolutely. But where did they come from? Yigdal is a song. It's a poem. Right? But where did it come from? The most common answer to this question is they're logically necessary. You can't move in Torah without believing that Hashem exists. And it's obvious that He's one. The Torah says so. Yeah. They're scattered throughout the Torah, and the Rambam has an amazing source for these. Incredible source. There's a Mishnah in Sanhedrin which has 13 things. They're not 13 articles of faith. They're 13 things that if you disbelieve, you're spiritually dead. In other words, I'll explain. The Mishnah says, Kol Yisrael yesh lehem chelek lomar. Every Jew has a share in the world to come, and these are the people who have no share in the world to come. These are people who are cut off and spiritually dead. In the next world, in the higher world, they do not exist. Who are they? Exactly these 13 in obverse. Word for word, right? I'll look it up yourself. I won't go through the Mishnah now, but I'll tell you what it is. The first one says, what does it say here? Ani ma'amin, I believe with perfect faith that Hashem is boirei umanig, that there's a God who creates and creates in time. Not only does He create in space, but He creates in time. In other words, He conducts the affairs of history, right? Look in the Mishnah there, it says, anybody who says that there's no creator or there's no boirei umanig, there's no creator or conductor of history, lose a share in the world to come. It's exactly the same principle with exactly the same details, but in the negative. The second one, I believe with perfect faith that Hashem is one and there's no oneness like His. The Mishnah says, anybody who says that God is two or more, you get it? Number 3, I believe that Hashem has no body and no image. There it says, anyone who says that Hashem has a body or an image, it's exactly the same words. Detail for detail. Did I convince you? Number 4, anybody who says that Hashem is not first and last, and there it says the opposite. Number 5, anybody who says, I believe with perfect faith that there's no one to pray to except Hashem. There it says, anybody who prays to a star or a zodiac to be an intermediary between it, they're exactly the same. Which means there are 13 items listed in the Mishnah that kill you spiritually. These are exactly the same. They're just, if a soldier's going into battle, I can say to him, if you get injured here, it's very dangerous. If you get injured here, it's very dangerous. Or I could say, protect yourself here, protect yourself here. It's the same principle said. So, the Rambam did not make these 13 up. What he did was he codified the Mishnah that says there are 13 things that kill you spiritually, and he simply flipped them into positive statements. These are the things you need to believe to be alive. Is this clear? Okay. There's one, by the way, that doesn't match. There's one that... This is homework. Am I allowed to give some homework? This is a homework exercise, and for every correct answer, the committee is going to buy you a whiskey.
I'm down.
There's one that doesn't match, amazingly, and it's the 10th one. The 10th one is, I believe with perfect faith that God rewards and punishes. The 11th one, sorry. 11. That God rewards and punishes. You'll not find it in the Mishnah. Isn't that amazing? In other words, and there's 13 worked out in another way. So the Mishnah does not mention reward and punishment, but it's a thing you need to believe, which amazingly suggests that a Jew needs to believe all of these 13, including that God rewards and punishes. But if you refuse to believe it, you're not spiritually dead. That's not so bad. That's a conclusion, right? It's not listed in the things that you die for, but it's listed as something you need. Very interesting. So that I leave to you to think about. It's a subject for another time, and I hope it keeps you up all night. But the point is that, but they're very clearly the same list. Okay, now, here comes the scary part. If that interpretation is true, it means like this. Somebody who says, I believe that all the words of the prophets are true, but he doesn't believe that Moshe is a different sort of prophet, is not spiritually alive. You see that? You're forced to that conclusion. And that's astounding. The person believes that all the prophets are true, including Moshe. He just doesn't believe that Moshe is a different sort of a prophet. He's got no part in Torah. Why is it that basic? So you see that clearly believing that Moshe is a different sort of prophet, not better, but categorically different, is a fundamental of Torah. And one of the reasons for this, as I tried to explain, is because you need to know that when you're studying Torah, you're hearing Hashem speak, not a human transmitting it in a... Okay. Let's go to the third. The third is that at this time when Moshe became a new sort of prophet, able to meet a new name, with no intermediaries, as it says in Kabbalah, he saw through a lens that is unclouded, a new type of miracle began to occur. And what I mean is this. First of all, by the way, you see, he becomes a new prophet, receiving a new prophecy, which is connection with Yud Kei Vav Kei, and new miracles are manifest through him. What does prophecy have to do with miracles? And the answer is everything. Listen carefully. No miracle ever occurred in Torah without the presence of a prophet. Can you think of any miracle that occurred? Manna falling from heaven, ocean splitting, river splitting, dead child being revived. There's always a prophet doing it. The Rambam says, you'll never find a nes in Torah without a Navi being present. Even when Hashem speaks to us personally, Moshe Rabbeinu needs to be there. Now, which means that Nevi'im, prophets, speak to us and perform miracles. Why? Because there are two ways to express yourself. You talk or you act. You can either speak or gesture. Right? You can talk or do. Those are the only two options. When Hashem operates in the world, he speaks or he does. And it's always both. How did Hashem create the world? Vayomer Elokim, God spoke, and Vayas Elokim, he did. When he gave us the Torah, he spoke to us at Sinai, and he gave us the tablets with his hands. So he's always speaking and acting. So the world expresses itself in two ways. speaking and acting. When Hashem wants to operate in the world directly, in a higher mode, he speaks and it's called prophecy, which is a higher mode, and he operates, which is called nisim, which is a higher mode. And therefore the prophet is the agent of both. The prophet's the agent of Hashem speaking in the world, and the prophet obviously is the agent of Hashem acting in the world. So the prophet speaks Hashem's word and he acts Hashem's actions. Side question you can ask, why does Hashem need a human being to do either or both of those? Again, when Hashem wants to operate in the hidden way, so then the world is hidden. But when Hashem wants to reveal himself, let him speak personally. He wants to do a miracle, let it happen. Why does he need a human being at those times? You hear the question? Again, Hashem wants to hide in the world, no problem. But he wants to be open, and he wants us to see him directly. He wants to break the rules. How does he do it? He speaks, but only through a human being. He wants to make a miraculous event, but only through a human being. Why? Except for the first two commandments that we heard directly from him. So there'd be one time in history, as I said before, that's a personal connection. I'll tell you the answer. The answer is because, and it's a wonderful thing to understand, is that Hashem created the world for human beings to operate. He didn't create the world for him to do. He can do whatever he wants. The whole point of the world is that we're here to fix it. And therefore nothing ever happens or ever will happen in history without a human being. And that's why we need Mashiach. Who needs Mashiach? Mashiach's going to happen at a time when Hashem's going to reveal himself. Who needs a human being? Nothing operates in the world without human effort and human action and human agency. That's why he created the world. Am I talking too long?
No.
I want to add something which is astounding, also a beautiful thing. This is found in the writings of the Ramat Vali. He was a contemporary of the Ramchal. He says something beyond beautiful. He says that when the Rambam wants to express that you have free will, he gives a source. He gives logical reason, but he also gives a source in the Torah. Where does the Torah tell us we have free will? So he says, the Torah says, behold, Hashem says, behold, I place before you today life and a blessing and a curse and death. So you see, free will. You got the option. Hashem's giving you options, what we call alternatives. Life and blessing, curse and death. So obviously you have free will. That's what he says. The weird thing is, he ignores the fact that 2 lines later the Torah says, Ubacharta b'chaim, choose life. Now if I ask you to give me a pasuk in the Torah, a verse in the Torah that tells me you have free will, you do a little word search, and you can come to the word choose. The Torah says, Bacharta b'chaim, choose life. Doesn't get better than that. The Rambam doesn't mention that. Again, I want you to give me a textual proof in the Torah that you have free will. Target the pasuk that says, choose. No. He gives you the verse that shows you that Hashem's giving you alternatives. Of course that's a proof of free will, but you can do better. You can give me a verse that says, you got to choose. And he says something like this, very, very exquisitely beautiful. He says that when Hashem gives you 2 choices, life and blessing, curse and death, it's wrong to think there's a choice and a non-choice. Life and blessing, and the other one's crash, burn and die. Hashem doesn't operate that way. If Hashem gives you a choice, they're both valid choices. Hashem wouldn't give you a choice and a non-choice. They're both valid choices. Hashem says, you can gain your perfection either way. Life and blessing, work hard, earn it, do mitzvahs, etc. Or punishment. Curse and death. And you'll get your perfection that way too. Obviously, he loves you. If you have a child, you're going to say to your child, you have 2 options, my son. You can do your homework and work hard, you'll get there, or I'll beat the daylights out of you. But I'm going to do that because I love you. Your martial arts teacher, right? If you pay a martial arts teacher, he's not going to let you fail. He's going to say, you either learn your defense or I'm going to break your ribs. And you're paying him for that, no? They're going to save your life one day. Is this clear? Punishment in Judaism is always corrective. It's never vindictive. If a parent is punishing a child vindictively, you need the social services. Is this clear? Whenever you punish somebody, if you love them, you're doing it to correct them. Which means when Hashem says, I give you a choice, I give you a valid choice. You reach your perfection through work and mitzvahs, or through punishment and pain. Either way, your doctor says to you, you either exercise and diet, or I'll meet you in the operating room in a year from now. But I'm going to fix you. Is this clear? Okay. So therefore, Hashem is giving you a valid choice of 2 options. Now the question is, why does he add choose life? The answer is not to tell you have free will, but to tell you which one he wants you to choose because he loves you. When you say to your child, you can work hard and etc., or you can get punished. Please don't do it that way. I don't want to hurt you. The reason Hashem says Bacharta b'chaim is not to tell you have free will. You already know you have free will. He's given you two valid choices. He adds those words, nothing to do with free will. It's just to tell you which one he wants you to do. Is this clear? Okay. Now the simple answer is, why does he want you to do that? Because he loves you. Listen to Ramat Vali's answer. Astounding. Beyond beautiful. If this doesn't move you, there's no hope for you. He says the reason that Hashem wants you to do it the good way, through earning it through mitzvahs, is because if it does it to you by punishment, you've perverted the reason for the creation. Because the creation was for you to earn things and build the world. And if he has to do it to you, instead of you doing it, you destroy the reason for his creating you. Isn't that amazing? You're going to pay for it. You're going to get through pain and suffering. You'll pay your dues. But that's not what I created you for. I created you for avodah, to work, to build yourself. And that's why he's... Ian, isn't that beautiful? So, here's what happens. New name, new prophet, and new miracles. Let me explain this. There are two types of miracle in the world. They're what we call Nisim Niglim and Nisim Nistorim. There's hidden miracles and revealed miracles. What's the difference? Hidden miracle is where something happens that is incredibly coincidental, statistically so improbable that you realize someone's talking to you, but it's not impossible. And Nes Nigle, a revealed miracle, is something that is physically impossible. A law of nature is broken. What's a hidden miracle? You're going for a run, and accidentally you run off a cliff. Not good. But as you fall, you grab a twig in the cliff, and you hang there dangling over thousands of feet of space, and as you hang, you feel the twig snap. But just as it snaps, there happens to be somebody practicing throwing ropes over the edges of cliffs that day, and you grab the rope, and he pulls you back up. That would leave you pretty frum for 2 or 3 days, I can assure you. But it's not impossible. And if you tell your atheistic, skeptical scientists, they'll say it could happen. But if you run off a cliff and you drop and you hold a twig and it snaps and you float back up and levitate back on, which will leave you religious for at least a week, that is called a revealed miracle. The difference is that one is simply statistical unlikely, and the other one is, by the way, we only see the first kind. We don't see, for the last 2,350 years, we've only seen hidden miracles. Until then, we had prophecy and miracles to go together always, like we said. From then, Hanukkah, Purim, and then Hanukkah. Purim was the light beginning to fade. Esther, the hidden one. The Megillah doesn't have Hashem's name. The miracle is not revealed. And then one flash of light at Hanukkah where the lights burn miraculously, and then nothing. So for all these hundreds of years, we've seen hidden miracles, but no longer revealed miracles. So those are the two categories. Now, here comes the key. Revealed miracles have two kinds. There's a revealed miracle where nature's set aside and incredible miraculous things happen. But then there's a thing Rashi calls nes b'seich nes, a miracle within a miracle. When Avram is thrown into a fire and doesn't burn, that's called a miracle. There are things that don't burn. But when a bush burns and doesn't burn at the same time, that's a whole new... That is two opposite things being one thing at the same time. That is a new name of God appearing in the world. And that's a new prophet who brings that into being. And so what happens? The Nile turns to blood. What does it mean? It's blood for them and water for us at the same time. The kids are taught, when the Egyptian grabbed the cup, it became blood. The Jew takes it, it's water. No, it wasn't changing from one to the other. At the same moment, it was blood for them and water for us. That's not possible, but that's what happened. And then the hail fell with fire inside. So the kids come home with their little models, like the block of ice, little space inside for the candle. It wasn't blocks of ice, it was fire and ice at the same time.
Till today.
What?
Also today.
What happens to it?
Thundering and lightning.
No. This was more than that.
Of course more, but still.
Listen to this. The Sfas Emes says when the Jewish people walked through the ocean, they walked on dry land underwater. Why does he say that? Because the Torah does. The Torah says, Bnei Yisrael halchu b'soich bayabasha. The Torah says the Jewish people walked in the midst of the ocean on dry land. That's what it says. Well, was it dry land? Yes. Was it ocean? Yes. Both at the same time? Is that possible? No. But it happened. When the Jewish people crossed the ocean, they were being born. And they were being born in a blaze of miracle within miracle. The ladies might like to hear this. You know that That was a moment of birth. Birth is always from water. You know, when the world was formed originally, it was water. And then there was a split, dry land revealed, and humans were created. Then they perverted their way, it was a flood, back to water. And then the flood ended, it was dry land, and humans created again. The Jewish people are a third edition of humanity. We went into an ocean that split to be born again. In Kabbalah it's written that when the ocean split was a woman's waters breaking in labor, as the Jewish people are born. That's what's happening. So we're born in a miraculous miracle, not just miracles, we're born in an impossible level of miracles. And of course, the culmination is we make a home where we live with Hashem, and there's a Holy of Holies, in which is an ark, which occupies no space. The Gemara says the Aron occupied no space. You measured from wall to wall, you got a measurement. You measured from wall to ark, you got the same measurement. It doesn't mean that the ark shrank, it would be possible, invalid. Doesn't mean the room expanded, it would be invalid. The room had its measurements, the ark occupied. Of course, the ark became, the Holy of Holies became the Holy of Holies in the temple, which is where space began to be created. Obviously, in the center where space is created, it has no dimension. This is not miracles. This is miracle within miracle, which is beyond. Okay, so what we've said this evening is that what we've said so far is that there have been 3 levels of revelation, and that is that first there is a new name of Hashem. Secondly, there's a new prophet who comes into contact with that name and brings it into contact with us. And third, the same prophet who brings that sort of prophecy to the world brings in a new sort of miracle, which is miracle within miracle, which had never been seen before. And therefore, the answer to the question we began with is, the Exodus from Egypt was a completely radical recreation of the world, a birth in a much higher plane than ever happened before. And that's how we go back to that moment when we say on Shabbos, Zeichel L'Maaseh Bereshis, commemorating the creation, and in the same breath we say Zeichel Yetzias Mitzrayim, we're saying that the two are one. There was a new creation which was nothing compared to the new creation where we became a people. Let me finish with something again beyond beautiful. The Rambam, talking about the Pesach Seder that we spoke about, here's how he gives you the law. Again, this is beyond. 7th chapter of the laws of Chometz and Matzah, where he tells you how to conduct a Pesach Seder. Listen to what he says. Mitzvahs eseh shel Torah. It's a positive mitzvah of the Torah. L'saper, to tell. What should the next words be? To tell the story of the Exodus, right? And indeed, on the next line, he goes on to say, that the Torah says, Shenema, because it says, Zocher hayom hazeh, remember this day, Asher Yetzias Mitzrayim, the day you left Egypt. So clearly the mitzvah is to talk about the Exodus from Egypt. That's what the Torah says, and that's what he codifies. Listen to his words. This is unbelievable. Mitzvahs eseh shel Torah. It's a positive mitzvah, l'saper b'nisim v'niflois, about the miracles and wonders, shenasu l'avosenu, that happened to our forefathers in Egypt, b'leil chamisha asar b'Nisan, on the 15th of Nisan. Not a word about the Exodus. I mean, this is beyond. Again, the Rambam is codifying the law to talk about the Exodus from Egypt. And clearly, that's what you have to do. He quotes the verse that says talk about the Exodus. And here's what you do. You tell your children about the miracles and wonders that occurred in Egypt. Not a mention of the Exodus. What is going on? And in case you think I'm making too much of it, 4 lines later, Ketzad mitzvah lo yedeh labonim. It's a mitzvah to tell the children. Va'afilu lo shalu, even if they never ask. That's the child that doesn't even know how to ask. Shenema, because it says you got it to the bincha, tell your child. Lefi daita shel ben aviv malamdoi. According to the wisdom or maturity intellectual of the child, the parent teaches him. Ketzad, how do you? Ima yakot notipesh. If the child was very small or intellectually undeveloped, omerli, you say, B'ni, my son, kulana yunavodim, we were slaves. Like, and then you say, Kamoshif chazu, you do a little show and tell, you grab one of the many servants wandering around your house. There was a time when, and you say to your child, we were servants like this man or like this woman, and Hashem redeemed us on this night and freed us. Hashem redeemed us and He took us out to freedom. That's a little child who cannot understand anything. But im haya ben gadol v'chacham. But if the child was older and wiser, moidiu ma she'ira v'nisim she'nasu. If your child's more mature, you tell him about the miracles that were done to us in Egypt. Not a word about the Exodus. This is amazing. So a small child is 3 years old, we would take him from slavery to freedom. But as soon as he's 4 years old, or 5 or 6, you say, we experienced miracles in Egypt. Not a word about leaving Egypt. Obviously you tell that. In the Rambam's on Haggadah he has the story. Obviously doesn't mean you don't tell the story. But that's not the point. That's not the mitzvah. The mitzvah is to tell your children about miracles. And by the way, really weird, which miracles do you tell the child? Nisim she'esan al yedei Moshe Rabbeinu. The miracles that occurred by Moses. We never mention Moshe in the Haggadah. We in our Haggadahs we mention him once because we happen to mention the Apostle. In the Rambam's Haggadah is not mentioned at all. How weird is that? The Rambam says, first problem, when you talk about the Pesach Seder, the mitzvah of telling about the Exodus, what do you talk about? Miracles. Exodus, no, that's not important. And when you tell a mature child, we experience miracles. The miracles that were done by means of Moshe, but we don't mention Moshe. What's going on is, what the Rambam means is, the story of the Exodus is the story from the natural to the miraculous. Which kinds of miracles? The ones that Moshe introduced, was a whole new level of miracle. Doesn't mean you mention Moshe, it's that level of miracle. Which means that if you think the Pesach Seder is about telling your child that we were slaves and freed, missing the point big time. If you tell your child we were in Egypt and went to Israel, you're missing the point big time. Every nation has a geopolitical story. Every nation. The South Africans have a story. They didn't like the British. Many people didn't like the British. The Americans didn't like the British either, right? They made independence from them. Every story, every nation. If you tell your children we were slaves in Egypt and freed, that's not the point. The point isn't that we left one country and went to another. The point is that we left the natural and moved into the supernatural. That's what a child has to know. He has get up from this Pesach Seder thinking that we were slaves and freed and now we got a national story. That's not the point. That's good when he's 3. But as soon as the child's beyond that, he's got to leave the Pesach Seder knowing that we became an impossible people. We moved into a world of paradoxical bonding with Hashem. He and us are the same thing. And that's what we've been burning throughout history and we're still here. And we always will be. Anyway, that's an introduction to this subject. And that's a beginning of thoughts, I think, about why we are based on the Exodus. We're talking about a new creation, a creation that is a birth into a supernatural world, something a far higher mode. And that, I think, is where it all begins. And from there, the story evolves. We moved to Sinai. That was a culmination of that experience. And as history progresses, that story continues. Thank you very much.
I want to thank everybody for coming once again. Thank you to the Fuchs, Smuckler, and Bezaglo families for sponsoring tonight. Leilu Nishmas, Henoch ben Yaakov Akoyen, and special thank you to Rabbi Tatz for joining us through his busy schedule. We will be davening Ma'ariv right now. And I think afterwards, if there's a few minutes left, we'll see if Rabbi Tatz has some time. Ma'ariv now, and we'll put up a mechitza over here. Anyone who wants to leave, not daven Ma'ariv, the men can go out that way, the ladies can go out the top. Thank you, everybody, for coming.